This is LRBT2, main conclusion, question 17. So we have an environmentalist, and what they go ahead and do is give us a series of facts. We know that the ecosystem of the North American prairie is complex. We also know that we've been destroying it to produce cattle feed, excuse me. So something about the prairie has the resources to support cattle. Humankind are terrible people. We're just destroying it. We can tell our environmentalist is a little concerned just because of the use of the word destroyed. And we also are going to later see that they're building out, like, we've got this issue. We're changing the ecosystem, and they're ultimately advocating for a return to the uncultivated state. So let's just kind of break this down. So our background information in sentence one, um, ecosystem of the prairie was super complex, but we're destroying it. By destroying it, we can produce more cow food. Awesome. Our next set of facts are more like, they're more easily picked out as facts because we've got some numbers, which don't really happen on the LSAT very often. But whenever we see numbers, if we are totally lost and confused, we can guess that that's data. And data means it's an evidence, it's supporting the claim. So we know that before we started destroying everything, our ecosystem supports millions of bison, but now it supports millions of cattle. So that's the change, and we might be tempted to compare bison and cattle, apples and oranges, but we just need to get the idea that there was some bison, lots of variation in how many bison can be supported, but now we can only support this cattle. Then they say, since bison yield as much meat as cattle, so we got a fact, and since the natural prairie required neither pesticides, machinery, nor government subsidies, they're talking about what the prairie does not require. So that's another set of facts. Because of these two facts, returning as much land as possible to an uncultivated state could restore biodiversity without a major decrease in meat population. So there's some fact hidden in there. They're saying if we do these things, it's plausible. Now, we have a main conclusion question, so we're trying to figure out, what is the environmentalist argument? Why did they make us sit through this paragraph? What are they trying to argue? Now, it's hard to pick some of these out sometimes because we're talking about lots of facts. Some people are going to look for the qualifying statements, the adjectives. So they might say, oh, largely been destroyed. That's going to be the claim because it's describing something, and all descriptors are arguable. But we want to just understand, why does our environmentalist include that first sentence? It's to give us background information. They're not arguing that we've destroyed this to produce cattle feed. They tell us it's been destroyed. They give us some data to explain how specifically. And then they give us a recommendation at the end. They say returning as much land as possible to an uncultivated state could restore biodiversity. They're trying to tell us that it's possible based off of the information they have. So we're wondering, how is this supported by the rest of the argument? How is returning as much land as possible restoring biodiversity without decreasing meat production? Now, the key here is that we looked at meat. Bison yield as much meat as cattle. And we know there's millions of bison before, and there's millions of cattle now. If every one bison, is worth one cow, then, there's a good chance that we're going to have about the same number of animals, big, large animals that produce equivalent meats. Oh, now I really want a burger. Okay, sorry. So we're just trying to think about, so the author has put these different facts in here to support this possibility or this theory at the end. If we do this, then this is possible. So this is the main conclusion question. We're going to try to find something that either says this verbatim or that restates it a little bit. So we're going to want to be really careful how we go through our answer choices. So A, what it does, it says if these techniques are reintroduced, meat population would decrease only slightly. Now, we have to think, is this what our conclusion is saying up in that stimulus? Our conclusion is saying if you return as much land as possible, then you wouldn't decrease meat production significantly or have a major decrease. So this A is wrong for a couple of reasons. If earlier agricultural techniques are reintroduced, we don't know how much earlier. We don't know if we are reintroducing the agricultural techniques. We just don't have no idea if that's the same as returning as much land as possible. And then meat production would decrease only slightly. Well, let's say we do return as much land as possible. Um, you know, what is only slightly? Maybe only slightly is 10 million large animals, cattle or bison. Maybe instead of the 50 million cattle, we're trying to restore the biodiversity, and we get like, we end up having 50 million, oh, excuse me, 50 million cattle now, and then we return everything the way it was, and then we have 40 million large animals. Some people might argue that that is not a slight decrease. We just don't have enough information here. So since we've got a lot of questions going on, we can eliminate A because it's not saying exactly what our conclusion in that paragraph is saying. B, protecting the habitat of wild animals so we can utilize these animals as a food source. Okay, we can even stop there. We're not talking about protecting the habitat so we can utilize the food source. We want to be careful because we might pull this extra information in. That's what they want us to do, but we're not going to do it. And then, if we didn't get caught up there, if we didn't get that B was wrong there, we have to look at the second part. Doing this protection of the habitat is more cost effective than raising domesticated animals. That's nowhere in our argument. We're not trying to argue that at all. C, the biodiversity of the North American prairie ecosystem should not be restored. If doing so will have intolerable economic consequences. So our environmentalist is just saying, if we restore as much land as possible, you could, still have just as much meat. We're not talking about the ecosystem should not be restored. That's actually probably the opposite of what our environmentalists would say. We know our LSAT writers absolutely love the environment. They think mankind has ruined everything. So, we don't have anything in our passage saying that we should not restore the prairie ecosystem. And we don't talk about economic consequences either. D, preservation of the remaining North American bison would be a sensible policy. Now, we could probably guess that our author agrees with this. Not enough information to really say that, but if they're an environmentalist, you gotta believe like they're probably gonna be in favor of it. But we have nothing, in here arguing is this a sensible policy or not. We're just saying if you return as much land as possible, you wouldn't have a major decrease in meat production. We have to be really careful because we might think, oh, therefore, since there's not a major decrease in meat production, it's sensible. That, my friends, is a necessary assumption. And we'll get there a little bit later in the course. But um, since we had to supply that extra jump, and we want to really check our mindsets here, if we have to supply any assumptions, if we supply that extra information and jump, it's not going to be our answer. So that leaves us with E. The devastation of the North American prairie ecosystem could be largely reversed. Okay, so that's looking nice. Could be nice little mild answer without significantly decreasing the meat production. Oh, they just summarized everything that's going on up in that highlighted piece in the paragraph. So we'll take E as our best answer here.